Collectively, our group did research and are presenting on a topic regarding biotech startups and whether funding drives startups to market too quickly. We're looking at this topic through the eyes of Theranos. Theranos was founded in Silicon Valley in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout. Driven by a vision to make lab testing accessible, affordable, and transparent as a basic human right, Holmes developed a plan to make this happen through testing equipment. The Edison was developed to be able to run 130 tests using blood from a single finger prick rather than intravenous blood draw. The blood would be captured in a patented nanotainer and tested using the Edison, that is the size of a desktop printer. Holmes became the youngest self-made billionaire female in the world, with a company valuation of $9 billion. Investors were pouring money into Theranos, and companies such as Walgreens began using Theranos technology for lab testing. The publicity lauding this new technology in the public sector also brought skepticism from many areas. And 1 year after the media frenzy, it was ultimately a 26-year-old former intern, Tyler Schultz, who blew the whistle on Theranos, causing government entities to take a hard look into their lab practices. Theranos was found to have unproven technology as well as patent lab results that were incorrect. The Wall Street Journal broke the story of Theranos technology's shortcomings, as well as Holmes's false claims. A CMS investigation found that quality checks were being falsified and has revoked Holmes's license to run a lab for the next 2 years. While Holmes seemingly had the public's greatest interest at heart, it begs the question of what it is to become a future biotech startups with potentially life-saving technology.
And accurate. And that's where the story of Theranos starts to crumble.
There were several labs that were tested that weren't totally accurate.
One study in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found the tests from Theranos retail testing sites in Phoenix, Arizona to have significant discrepancies. But even more damaging, an assessment from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services of their Newark, California lab, which questioned Theranos' ability to run a clinical laboratory, citing, quote, a global and long-term failure of the quality control program, and demanding they get their act together.
Theranos chose to use healthcare technology on patients before it was proven in a test environment. Was that an ethical decision? Theranos covered up shortcomings in the technology. Was this ethical? Put succinctly, our group decided the moral problem is who was affected by the company's decision to cover up inaccurate test results. Our group began our investigation into the moral problem of the effects of the major biotech startup snafus by first considering which groups benefited or were harmed by the malfeasance. There were few groups who benefited from Theranos' faulty equipment and cover-up of their inaccurate testing. Customers and patients who were finally able to get accurate test results from proven providers. The tech startup industry was reminded that a seemingly well-meaning company will not have a happy ending if laws are broken. This is viewed as a healthy way to show that sensational companies who appear to be the next best thing can fail when they neglect to do the right thing. Walgreens benefited from Tyler Schultz blowing the whistle on Theranos because they were able to inform their customers of potential false test results. And finally, the American people benefited in knowing that there is always a way to do the right thing. No company is truly too big or sensational or well-meaning to evade the law.
Unfortunately, the actions of Mrs. Holmes and Theranos led to many people being harmed, too many to mention here. We discuss a few of them in our presentation, and we'll start with the whistleblower, Tyler Schultz.
In an odd twist of events, Tyler's grandfather happens to sit on the board of Theranos and had previously held the offices of Secretary of State, Labor, and Treasury. When Tyler first brought his concerns to his grandfather, the president of Theranos, and Holmes herself, he was met with discourse and threats. He then blew the whistle on Theranos. Currently, Tyler's family has spent nearly $500,000 on attorney's fees, and Tyler no longer speaks with his 95-year-old grandfather. More obvious of who was harmed were the patients. They had received inaccurate test results from Theranos, and these were precisely the people who Holmes was trying to help. It also didn't go unnoticed that Holmes lost a great source of income. Investors had to pull out and be repaid when Theranos Lab was required to be closed by CMS. Theranos has now had to let go over 41% of its employees due to the closure of its labs. Possibly the most tragic of the groups who were harmed were the scientists who worked at Theranos. Holmes was repeatedly blaming the people at Theranos for its problems. This picture is of Ian Gibbons, the lead scientist of Theranos, who died by suicide just hours after Holmes asked him to testify in favor of Theranos.
Holmes has until September 5th to appeal. But in her first interview since the CMS decision, she insists that technology was never to fault for the erroneous results. Instead, she blames it on flawed operations and personnel.
At the highest level, we didn't have the right leadership in the laboratory, and we didn't have the implementation of the quality system in terms of procedures and the associated documentation to ensure that we were realizing the quality standards that we hold ourselves to.
Of course, in the middle of all this are patients whose health depended on Theranos for accurate results.
There's this man who goes by the initials RC right now in Arizona, who is suggesting that the lab results that he got from Theranos were not accurate, and it led to him having a heart attack. Based on what you know, is it possible that what he's saying is true? Could he have gotten a lab result that was so askew that he didn't act on it, and then a month later he ended up having a heart attack?
I'm not the lab director, and so...
I know, but you're the CEO and founder of the company. I mean, this is as serious as it gets.
What I know is that I've put the best people in place to be able to investigate every aspect of this and ensure that we meet the quality standards that we hold ourselves to, and I know they're doing that.
The biggest problem was going live with blood tests that didn't work or that worked only part of the time.
Theranos is under the microscope of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission about whether it misled investors about its technology.
Our group discussed whose rights were exercised and ignored through the lens of Theranos misleading investors.
What you see behind me here is Salt Lake City. It's one of the greatest places for entrepreneurs and new startups. Now imagine if Salt Lake City had a situation like we had at Theranos in Silicon Valley. What if we had entrepreneurs and startups lying or misleading venture capitalists here in Salt Lake? What would happen if you went to your healthcare provider and you weren't sure that the results you were getting were accurate? Worse yet, what if you thought they were accurate and you weren't getting treated and you were the person spreading disease? And then even worse than that, what would happen if your healthcare provider couldn't be certain that the results they were getting were accurate? Aren't these our rights as citizens?
When discussing the economic benefits of Theranos, the hopeful beneficiaries in the beginning would have been the healthcare industry, the investors, the employees, and the list goes on and on and on. But our group decided that in the end, the only people who benefited were the attorneys involved in the legal proceedings. Every news story about Theranos' downfall has included the CMS and the SEC filings against the company. Governing bodies and the general public seem to have been kept in the dark as to what was happening in the Theranos lab for 12 years at least. As you can see from this interview clip, where a healthcare provider asked a seemingly simple question to Holmes.
I mean, what we've demonstrated in our first publication on our nanotainers focuses on this, is what we were just talking about a series of assays across clinical chemistries, immunochemistries, hematology-based assays that you can, with the method we've created and the type of process we've created to get blood into the nanotainer, see comparable data between fingerstick and venous draws. And
could you give that URL, the publication information, put it out openly in the URL we would like to see?
Absolutely. We're doing it right now. And I mean, I've put
Well,
this
let's
invitation
just,
out
we
there
were talking
before.
about this, we were talking about the Rice study, which I know a lot of people saw, which showed
Yeah.
that there was wild variation in droplets of bloods and things like leukocyte counts and red
Yep.
blood cell counts.
Yep.
You were saying that this is a problem that you think you've solved and that you have data that you've solved.
Yep.
So you collect more than one droplet from each patient? Is that the essential?
We do. I mean, we've optimized our collection process exactly for that. And yeah, yes.
Okay. Well,
And I mean, just to put it out there, I've invited many reporters to our office to do finger sticks and compare them to venous straws, and also to send the venous straws to multiple labs to see lab-to-lab variability, and I would extend the invitation.
I would still like to. I said last time, I know some stuff happened in between,
Yeah.
but I would still like to do
there's nothing
that.
like firsthand experience, right? And we have, I mean, I don't know your background, but you're welcome to come and try it if you would like to.
I would still rather see a study of me and 499 of my closest friends doing that double-blind.
The nanotainer studies have hundreds of patients.
All right.
Just to re-emphasize my question again, please.
Yeah.
There is no interstitial fluid in the blood draw coming from finger prick.
Well,
Yes or no? Sorry, I'm sorry. Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no question.
I see. So you have interstitial fluid in the finger prick blood.
You might not, right? It's complicated. You have to validate the assay assuming that you have a mix of interstitial, potentially arterial blood in the capillary sample, right?
So in which case, I would love to see the comparison, head-to-head comparison between that blood sample versus from the same patient at the same time coming from the venous draw. That would be great.
Yeah, that's what we're publishing. But if you'd like to do the test, if you'd like to come to Theranos and do it yourself,
No, I'm not
you're welcome
coming
to do it.
Believe
All
me.
right.
Well, then you shouldn't question it.
We are at time, and we are going to have to.
Did you hear that last part of the interview where Holmes tells the gentleman that he shouldn't question if he's not going to try it firsthand? Is this the ethical attitude you want your healthcare provider to have? This case was rife with ethical duties that were violated. We'll discuss a few here, but we invite you to look through the rest of them in our paper. When I look at this quote by Holmes, I have to ask myself whether she was truly trying to save the world or if she just wanted to have a big, successful biotech startup. Because in the case of Theranos, there was no backup plan, nor, does it seem, was there much pre-planning. While this meme may seem comical, what truly happened was that Theranos exploited the least among us. She violated distributive justice when she pushed false test results to her target customers that just so happened to be unable to afford lab test results through their providers. She also violates distributive justice when laying off over 41% of her workforce when her company failed. Perhaps Holmes set herself on fire too soon. Maybe that's what led her to this web of deceit, cover-up, and lies. This would call into question Holmes's personal virtues.
This was a really difficult conclusion for our group to come to. We decided that Holmes probably meant well, but she harmed so many people in the process of starting up Theranos. She treated the company more like a technology startup rather than a healthcare startup. And this probably caused future biotech companies that have potential life-saving capabilities the resources they need to get off the ground.
Our group hopes Theranos can safely change the healthcare industry and the world for that matter for the better in the future by going through all the proper channels. Thank you.